Okay, I'm sorry, I got to catch up a little bit. So we're in the Daf Yomi. So this is Avodah Zarah, Daf 30. So at the end of Daf 29, it says Rabbi Elah says, we learned that cooked wine belonging to Gentiles that was originally uncooked wine is prohibited. The Gemara again asks, isn't this obvious? Just because the wine was cooked, should its prohibition lapse? So Rabbi Ashi said, this comes to teach us that our cooked wine, that is in a Gentile's possession, does not require a seal within a seal, for it is to remain permitted for consumption. Rather, one seal is sufficient. So Rav Ashi elaborates, if the concern is due to illustrious libation, the Gentiles do not offer libations of cooked wine. And if it is due to the concern that a Gentile, we're in 30 now, if it is due to the concern that a Gentile may secretly exchange his wine with the wine of a Jew, since there is one seal, the Gentile will not exert himself and forge a different seal in order to facilitate the exchange. So the Gemara discusses the halacha with regard to various types of wine. The sages taught cooked wine in aluntit of Gentiles are prohibited. So aluntit is of unclear origin. This term probably evolved from the Greek, I don't want to even try to pronounce that word, meaning ointment, often used in reference to a particular ointment prepared with wine. Okay, so the sages taught cooked wine in aluntit of Gentiles are prohibited, but already prepared aluntit that was made by a Jew before it entered the Gentiles' possession is permitted. The Gemara asks, and what is aluntit? It is, as we learned in a Braita with regard to Shabbat, one may prepare anomlin, but one may not prepare aluntit. The Braita clarifies, and what is anomlin, and what is aluntit? Anomlin is a drink that is a mixture of wine, honey, and pepper. Aluntit is a mixture of aged wine and clear water and balsam, which they prepare for drinking after bathing in a bathhouse to cool down from the heat of the bathhouse. It is prohibited to prepare aluntit on Shabbat because it is a type of remedy. So Rabbah and Rav Yosef both say diluted wine is not subject to the halacha of exposure. So according to which the consumption of a liquid is prohibited if it is left uncovered, and cooked wine is not subject to the halacha of libation, which prohibits deriving benefit from wine that has been in a Gentile's possession. A dilemma was raised before them. With regard to cooked wine, is it subject to the halacha of exposure, or is it not subject to the halacha of exposure? The Gemara resolves the dilemma. Tashema, come in here. Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi testified about cooked wine and stated that it is not subject to the halacha of exposure. The Gemara cites another proof that cooked wine is not subject to the halacha of exposure. When Rabbi Yanai Bar Yishmael became ill, Rabbi Yishmael ben Zerud and other sages went to him to inquire about his health. They were seated, and with this very dilemma was raised before them. With regard to cooked wine, it is subject to the halacha of exposure, or is it not subject to the halacha of exposure? Rabbi Yishmael ben Zerud said to them, this is what Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says in the name of a great man. Parenthetically, the Gemara asks, and who is this great man? He is Rabbi Chia. He said, cooked wine is not subject to the halacha of exposure. The sages said to Rabbi Yishmael ben Zerud, shall we rely on this claim? And Rabbi Yanai Bar Yishmael motioned to them, upon me and upon my neck. That is, you can certainly rely on this claim. The Gemara relates another incident. Shmuel and Ablet, a Gentile scholar, were sitting together, and others brought cooked wine before them. Ablet withdrew his hand to avoid rendering the wine prohibited to Shmuel. Seeing this, Shmuel said to Ablet that the sage said, cooked wine is not subject to the prohibition of wine used for a libation, and therefore you need not withdraw your hand on my account. I'm kind of curious if cooked wine is basically like how today we have grape juice, so it stays fresh and sweet because it was cooked, like pasteurized. I'm not exactly sure, but it might be something like that. So anyway, therefore you need not withdraw your hand on my account. So the Gemara cites another incident. Rabbi Chia's maidservant noticed that a certain container of cooked wine had become exposed. She came before Rabbi Chia, who said to her that the sages said cooked wine is not subject to the halacha of exposure. Similarly, Rav Ada Bar Ahavaz's attendant noticed that a certain container of diluted wine had become exposed. So Rav Ada Bar Ahavaz said to him that the sages said diluted wine is not subject to the halacha of exposure. So Rav Papa said, we said that wine is not subject to the halacha of exposure only in a case where it was well diluted, but where it was only partially diluted, a snake might still drink from it, and therefore it is prohibited. The Gemara rejects this claim. And is it correct that a snake drinks partially diluted wine? But wasn't Rabba bar Rav Huna once traveling on a ship while carrying a jug of wine with him? And he saw a certain snake that slithered and approached the wine. He said to his attendant, "Remove the eyes of this serpent, that is, do something that will cause the snake to leave." His attendant took a bit of water and threw it in the wine, and the snake turned away. This indicates that snakes do not drink partially diluted wine. The Gemara rejects this conclusion. For undiluted wine, a snake will risk its life by exposing itself to humans, but for diluted wine, a snake will not risk its life. But in either case, the wine is left unguarded, a snake will drink from it. The Gemara raises a difficulty. And is it true that for diluted wine, a snake will not risk its life? But wasn't Rabbi Yanai once in Be Achbori, and some say that it was Bar Hadaya, who was in Be Achbori, and others were sitting with him drinking diluted wine. When they finished, they had some wine left in the container, and they covered it with a cloth. And then they saw a certain snake take water in its mouth and pour it through the cloth into the container until the liquid filled the container, and the wine flowed over the cloth, and the snake drank the overflowing wine. This shows that a snake will risk its life to drink diluted wine. Okay, so it's kind of like a really weird story here, but I don't think that you take the snake as a literal snake. And this is never something that's really seems to be taken as a literal snake. So there's a message here that's a little deeper than what's going on. And it's interesting because a lot of times we talk about this kind of stuff with a snake coming overnight and things like that. And this is why you keep your drinks covered. So there's something else going on, and it's not just a snake, because as you see here, it's talking about a snake taking water, filling up a container so that it can drink from it. So there's a you know what I mean. Okay, so the sage is saying in response, wine that the snake itself diluted, it does drink. So wine that another diluted, it does not drink. In other words, a snake does not drink diluted wine unless it was diluted by the snake itself. Accordingly, even partially diluted wine is not subject to the halacha of exposure. So Rav Ashi says, and some say that it was Rav Masharshia, who says, are you providing a resolution for a situation involving danger? In other words, one may not endanger lives by subscribing to such reasoning. So Rava said, the halacha is that diluted wine is subject to the halacha of exposure and is also subject to the prohibition of wine used as a libation for idolatry. So cooked wine is not subject to the halacha of exposure and is not subject to the prohibition of wine used for a libation either. So after discussing exposed wine, the Gemara addresses the matter of exposed water. So the attendant of Rav Hilkiah Bartovi noticed that a certain jug of water had become exposed and he had been sleeping near it. He went to Rav Hilkiah Bartovi to determine the halakhic status of the exposed water. So Rav Hilkiah said to him that the sages said, fear of a sleeping person is upon them, that is, snakes will not attempt to drink from a container that is near a person even if he is asleep. And this matter applies only during the day, but not at night. The Gemara comments, but that is not so. Rather, there is no difference between one who sleeps during the day and one who sleeps during the night. In both cases, we do not say that the fear of a sleeping person is upon the snakes. The Gemara presents the opinions of Rav and Shmuel with regard to the various sources of water. So Rav would not drink water from the house of an Armenian, as he said, they are not careful with regard to exposure. But he would drink water from the house of a widow. As he said, she upholds her late husband's conventions and ensures that liquids are not left uncovered. By contrast, Shmuel would not drink water from the house of a widow, as he said, she no longer has the fear of a man upon her, and therefore she does not necessarily cover the water, but he would drink water from the house of an Armenian, as he said, granted that they are not particular about the halacha of exposure, but in any event they are particular about cleanliness, and will cover it for hygienic reasons, if not halakhic ones. The Gemara cites a different version. Some say that Rav would not drink water from the house of an Armenian, but he would drink water from the house of a widow. Shmuel would not drink water from either the house of an Armenian or the house of a widow. So, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says there are three kinds of wines that are not subject to the halacha of exposure, and they are sharp, bitter, and sweet wines. Sharp is referring to acrid wine, so tila, that cracks the jug due to its acidity. Bitter is referring to yarneka. Sweet is referring to sweetened wine. These three wines that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says are not subject to the halacha of exposure are all of low quality. So Rav Chama teaches that the three wines are of high quality. Sharp is referring to wine mixed with peppers. Bitter is referring to wine mixed with wormwood or absinthe. Sweet is referring to Maybarg, a choice beverage. So Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says, Karina is not subject to the halach of exposure. The Gemara asks, what is Karina? Rabbi Abahu said, it is sweet wine that comes from Asia or Asya, or Asia Minor. So Rava says, but in its place of origin, it is subject to the halach of exposure. What is the reason? The reason is that there, it is the wine of the province, and snakes do not hesitate to drink from it. So Rava said, with regard to this wine that has soured, or de'akrin, until 3 days have passed from when it began to sour, it is subject to the halach of exposure and is subject to the prohibition of wine used for libation. From this point forward, it is not subject to the halach of exposure and is not subject to the prohibition of wine used for libation. And the sages of Nahar Dea say, even after 3 days, we are concerned with regard to exposure. What is the reason? It is because at times it occurs that a snake drinks even sour wine. The Gemara discusses the halach of exposure with regard to various foods and drinks. The sages taught wine that is still fermenting is not subject to the halach of exposure. And how long is its fermentation process? It is 3 days. So cress-based dishes are not subject to the halach of exposure, but the residents of the diaspora are accustomed to treating them as prohibited if they were left exposed. And we said this only in a case where the dishes do not contain vinegar, but if they do contain vinegar, the vinegar repels the snakes. And in such a situation, even the inhabitants of the diaspora do not treat them as prohibited. The Gemara continues, Babylonian kutach, a popular dip, is not subject to the halach of exposure, but the residents of the diaspora are accustomed to treating it as prohibited. So Rav Menashe said, if the kutach has indentations in it, we are concerned that they are from a snake's fangs, and is therefore prohibited. So Rav Chia bar Ashi says that Shmuel says dripping water is not subject to the halach of exposure while it is being collected. So Rav Ashi said, and that is the halacha only in a case where the dripping occurs one drop immediately after another drop, that is continuously, as the snake will not drink from it in that circumstance. So Rav Chia bar Ashi says that Shmuel says, the mouth of a fig is not subject to the halacha of exposure. In accordance with whose opinion is it stated? It is stated with the accordance with the opinion of this Tana, as it is taught in Braita, that Rabbi Eliezer said, a person may eat grapes and figs at night, and he need not have the cause for concern, as it is stated, the Lord preserves the simple, Psalms 116, verse 6. This verse teaches that one need not fear that harm might befall him when he engages in commonplace activities. So Rav Safra says in the name of Rabbi Yehoshua Daroma, there are 3 kinds of snake venom. Venom of a young snake, which sinks into the bottom when it is deposited in liquid. Venom of a snake of intermediate age. And a snake that is no longer young, which is suspended in the liquid, and venom of an old snake, which floats at the top. So the Gemara asks, is this to say that as the snake ages, its strength of its venom becomes weaker? But isn't it taught in Braita that three creatures become stronger as they age? They are a fish, a snake, and a pig. The Gemara answers, it is physically that a snake strengthens, but the potency of its venom diminishes. The Gemara asks, with regard to what halacha was it stated that the venom of a young snake sinks? The Gemara explains, as it is taught in Braita, with regard to a barrel that was uncovered, even though 9 people drank from it and did not die, the 10th should not drink from it, as the venom may have sunk to the bottom of the barrel. The Gemara relates that there was an incident in which 9 people drank from an exposed barrel and did not die, and a 10th subsequently drank from it and died. Rabbi Yirmiyah says this is an example of venom that sinks. It is interesting because the Gemara actually uses this example of barrels. Barrels are throughout the Gemara. Anyway, and similarly, with regard to a melon that was exposed, even though 9 people ate from it and did not die, the 10th should not eat from it. Again, there was an incident in which 9 people ate from a melon and did not die, and the 10th ate from it and died. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says this is an example of venom that sinks. The sages taught, with regard to water that was exposed, one may not pour it one may not pour it out in the public thoroughfare, nor settle dust with it by sprinkling it in the house. Because if they had dusty floors, you'd pour water down to keep the dust from coming up. Like, there were a lot of places where a lot of times they would have houses and the floor was actually dirt. It was the ground below you. It wasn't like a board, like boards on the ground or anything like that. It was literally the ground below your feet. And therefore, you'd sprinkle water on the ground to keep the dust down. So, the sages taught with regard to water that was exposed, one may not pour it out in the public thoroughfare, nor settle dust with it by sprinkling it in the house, nor mix clay with it, nor give it to drink to his animal or the animal of another, nor wash his face, hands, or feet with it. Others say, if the part that one is washing is an area of the body that has a crevice in it, it is prohibited to wash it with exposed water, as the venom may seep through the crevice. If the body part does not have a crevice, it is not permitted. The Gemara raises a difficulty. The opinion introduced with the phrase "others say" is identical to the opinion of the first Tana of the Braita. Both hold that one may not wash his face, hands, and feet with exposed water, as these body parts have crevices in them. The Gemara explains, there is a difference between them and with regard to the back of a hand and the back of a foot and the upper part of the face, that is, the area of the cheekbones. Accordingly to the opinion introduced with the phrase "others say," it is permitted to wash those parts of the body as they are free of crevices. According to the first Tana, it is prohibited as they are part of they are part of the face, hands, and feet. Amar Mar, the master said, above concerning exposed water, nor give it to drink to his animal, nor the animal of another. The Gemara asked, but isn't it taught in Braita, but one may give exposed water to his own animal to drink? The Gemara answers, when that Braita is taught, it is referring to a cat, as cats are less susceptible to snake venom. The Gemara challenges, if that is so, let him also give the water to the cat of another. The Gemara explains, the venom weakens the cat of another. The Gemara challenges, but doesn't the venom also weaken his own cat? The Gemara explains, it will later recover. The Gemara explains, although both will eventually recover, there are times that the owner wishes to sell the cat and loses potential profit from the cat's current weakness. Rabbi Yossi says, Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera, there are three kinds of prohibited wines. It is prohibited to derive benefit from wine used for a libation, and the wine imparts severe ritual impurity when it has the volume of an olive balk. And that is the end of Daf 30. So this was an entirely spiritual Daf here. So this is not like talking about stuff that is just as plain and simple. Like, don't think PESHAT here. This is not PESHAT. So, okay. So, thanks for watching.